Okay, ladies and gentlemen, apologies for the slightly delayed start. We've just been finished waiting for the event next door to finish, but we will make a start because I know time is precious. First of all, thank you all so much for coming, for making the time to be here today. By way of introduction, my name is Beverley Eve. I'm one of the directors of IOPHR, and for those of you that are unfamiliar, IOPHR is the international organisation to preserve human rights. So we're an active non-profit organisation and a think tank that's based in the United Kingdom with members spanning across the globe. Our mission as an organisation is to fight for freedom and democracy and to raise awareness of human rights violations around the world. Currently, we have a special focus on Iran. For those of you who are on Twitter, active on Twitter, you can follow us at IOPHR Press, all one word. And also, you may have noticed there's a list going around. If you wish to get updates from us, to be added to the email list, please add your email address there. Okay, so the title of today's event, How to Stop the Global Threat of the Iranian Regime and Urgent Next Steps the UK government must take to support the people of Iran in their fight for freedom and democracy. We're very pleased to welcome a number of MPs today and representatives from different embassies, including Ambassador of Finland, representatives from Poland, Lithuania, Germany and Norway. The Ukrainian embassy had wished to be here. We now understand that they were very busy organising a large event, which I'm sure many of you have now heard about, which took place in the Parliament today with President Zelensky visiting. At the end of November, we held a very similar event and we discussed the situation in Iran, but there's been many developments since then. Those of you following the news in Iran will know many of these. To name just a few, the uprisings throughout Iran have continued. 4 innocent protesters have been executed, one of whom, as we know, is British national Ali Reza Akbari. There's been public execution as well. On January the 18th, MEPs voted 598 to 9 to prescribe the IRGC as a terrorist organisation. And of course, before that, on the 12th of January, UK MPs agreed unanimously to do the same. For those of you following popular culture and the Grammys, you will have heard that the new Special Merit Award for Social Change was awarded to Shervin Hajipur for the song Baraya. So, from another perspective, just the scale of the news of Iran reaching the rest of the world. We have some great panelists speaking today. They will give you much more detailed updates on everything I've mentioned. So without further ado, I would like to start by introducing our first speaker today, who will be Professor Javaid Rehman. So Mr. Javaid Rehman is a Professor of International Human Rights Law and Muslim Constitutionalism at Brunel University, London, and the UN Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in the Islamic Republic of Iran. On July the 6th, 2018, Mr. Javaid Rehman was appointed as the 3rd Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in the IRI, since the re-establishment of the mandate. He commenced his duties officially on the 13th of July 2018. The former mandate holder, Ms. Asma Jahangir, assumed the mandate from November 2016 until her sudden passing in February 2018. And prior to that, Mr. Ahmed Shahid assumed the mandate from June 2011 to September 2016. Mr. Rehman is a Professor of International Human Rights Law and Muslim Constitutionalism at Brunel University. He teaches human rights law and Islamic law and continues to publish extensively in the subjects of international human rights, Islamic law, constitutional practices of Muslim-majority states. Several of his published works have been translated into various languages, and as a human rights lawyer, Mr. Rehman has also provided legal opinions on various high-profile cases in a number of jurisdictions. I'm pleased to hand the floor over.
Thank you. Can I stand? And hopefully everybody could hear me loud and clear. Thank you very much for this invitation. I'm very grateful. I'm grateful for this opportunity to speak with you. Please allow me to begin my presentation by expressing my sympathies and sincere condolences for those who have lost members of their families, friends, and loved ones in the devastating earthquakes in Turkey and Syria. Now to Iran. Gina Mahsa Amini's death in the custody of the so-called morality police on 16th of September last year unleashed one of the strongest waves of protests, as you would know, as well as civil unrest, which Iran has not seen in the past 4 decades. Gina Mahsa Amini's death 3 days after she was arrested by the morality police and with evidence that she had been assaulted, violently beaten, and mistreated by the police, the tragedy is before us. Her crime was that she was not wearing her hijab properly. And as you know, hijab wearing is enforced in Iran. It is a criminal offense if you don't wear hijab. And those who perceive improper hijab can violate the human dignity and respect for women with impunity. The killing of this young woman is unfortunately a tragic reflection of the violence against girls and women in Iran. In her case, there are also clear implications with an ethnic and religious dimension, as she was from ethnically a Kurdish minority and from the Sunni background. However, the law of enforced hijab and the manner of its enforcement by state authorities is emblematic of violence, brutality, and violations of the fundamental human rights and human dignity of girls and women of Iran. Her death, as I just mentioned to you, generated considerable, significant, sustained nationwide protests. However, the manner in which the Iranian regime handled these protests is heart-wrenching and painful to elaborate. Over 527 protesters have been killed since 16th of September last year, which includes at least 34 women and at least 71 children. There are also consistent reports and testimonies of torture and ill treatment of protesters, including allegations of sexual and gender-based violence. Hundreds of protesters have been severely injured and thousands arrested, detained, or incarcerated. By some estimates, over 18,000 individuals were arrested or detained. I'm horrified, shocked, and outraged that despite appeals by the international community, including by my own mandate, Iranian authorities have thus far executed at least 4 persons associated with protests. They have been tried arbitrarily, summarily, and through sham trials, which violated the right to fair trial and due process. I'm very concerned that at least 100 other individuals have been charged with offenses that carry the death penalty and may be either awaiting or pending trial. These executions are used as a tool of repression to instill fear, and these are symbols of Iranian state brutality. As a response to this brutality, the international community, including the United Kingdom, have taken a number of important steps, including accountability for gross violations of human rights since the protest started on 16th of September. These initiatives include convening of a special session by the Human Rights Council with a resolution establishing an independent international fact-finding mission with a mandate to investigate alleged human rights violations relating to the protests since 16th of September, especially with respect to women and children. Iran, as some of you would know, was also removed from the Commission, the United Nations Commission on the Status of Women in December 2022. I have fully supported and endorsed both these initiatives. The United Kingdom, along with a number of states, have imposed targeted human rights sanctions against individuals and entities in Iran. Iran, nevertheless, continues to remain a serious threat to regional and international peace and security, with substantial human rights concerns. Amongst the most serious human rights concerns are deplorable levels of executions, a tool that the regime adopts in order to terrorize its own people, as well as foreign and dual nationals. Persecution, torture, and ill treatment of ethnic, linguistic, and religious and sexual minorities, as well as targeting and victimization of human rights defenders and political activists. The treatment of non-constitutional recognized minorities, such as the Baha'is and Christian converts, is particularly shocking and appalling. After China, Iran remains the highest executioner of individuals in the world. And amongst offenses that carry the death penalty are not only vague national security offenses such as Muharebe, waging war against war, Afsad Filad, which means corruption on earth, and Baghi, which means armed rebellion. There are also Qisas offenses such as for murder or Hudud crimes, which include adultery, same-sex relations, blasphemy, armed robbery, theft, and alcohol consumption for fourth conviction, as well as drug offences. Last year, at least 500 persons were executed, which included 13 women, and totally contrary to international law and Iran's own international obligations, at least 3 children or child offenders were executed. Amongst these figures is an alarming increase in executions, in particular of drug offender executions, and of course the resumption of public executions. It is urgent that Iran immediately stops this terrorization of its own people through mass executions. The international community and the United Kingdom cannot engage with a state which continues to violate the dignity and fundamental rights of its own people, in particular its children, through executions. I would urge the UK government and the international community to continue to condemn executions in Iran and to introduce and adopt resolutions in the Human Rights Council condemning arbitrary and unlawful executions, in particular executions of children. In light of the huge and unacceptable rise in drug offender executions, which I say includes disproportionate number of ethnic, linguistic, and religious minorities, those states which have continued to assist the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime in Tehran must reconsider and review their support for the Iranian regime. International community cannot be a party to violations of the rights of the individuals through arbitrary executions on the basis of drug offences charges. The execution of the dual UK Iranian national, Mr. Ali Reza Akbari, last month on charges of spying for the UK, once again brought home the considerable risk, arbitrary arrest, torture, and ill treatment faced by dual and foreign nationals. Iranian authorities continue to violate human rights of individuals in order to put pressure on foreign governments as a tactic either for prisoner swaps or for other returns. Such instrumentalization of individuals amount to hostage-taking and must be recognized as such, and all those involved in acts of hostage-taking must be held accountable. Iran is a state party to the Convention Against the Taking of Hostages, and there are possibilities within the domestic law of the United Kingdom which criminalizes hostage-taking and to hold Iranian officials responsible in cases of serious violations of rights of dual and foreign nationals. In order to achieve its agenda of threats and generating fear, the Iranian regime actively blocks information. We have seen in the past and over the years, there has been a determined effort to block access to information, including severe internet disruption and censorship of social media platforms. Threats including in some cases death threats, harassment, detention, and violence against journalists and media workers has continued. Women journalists and news agencies based outside of Iran have been disproportionately targeted with intimidation and smear campaigns and attacks and have been harassed through the dissemination of false and defamatory information and threats of sexual violence using online platforms and state-controlled media. Such threats and intimidation must be condemned in the strongest terms, and those who conduct these crimes must be held accountable. Freedom of information is an essential tool for those wanting democratic reform. UK and its allies must work closely to ensure that technology companies are able to make online communication tools available to the Iranian people and provide funding to make these free of cost. It is evidently clear that Iran and the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps has been and is a threat to regional and international peace and security. The IRGC has supported various terrorist organizations regionally and internationally. Its consistent violations of territorial integrity of neighboring states, most recently in Iraq, and the regime's support of Russia and provisions of drones used in Ukraine is deeply concerning. There must be accountability for such terrorist actions. And while the Security Council remains in paralysis to take effective action, individual states must hold Iran and the IRGC accountable through individual and collective sanctions, as well as accountability of individuals committing serious human rights and humanitarian law abuses through, for example, application of universal jurisdiction, as we witnessed last year in the Swedish courts. The rights to democratic governance, rule of law, and self-determination are ultimately the rights of the people of Iran, which only the people of Iran themselves can claim within the established framework of international human rights law. However, the United Kingdom, alongside the international community, can find ways to support these rights. Alongside measures of accountability, there must be condemnation and isolation of a regime which blatantly violates fundamental human rights. We must always prioritize human rights and not let diplomatic or other considerations distract our attention. Those states, including our allies and partners, including members of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, and I come from Pakistan, so Pakistan is an important member of the OIC. These states must be engaged to support the core values of international human rights law. We must not allow any deviation or desertion of the important cause of promoting and protecting the rights of the Iranian people. I thank you.
Thank you very much. We will move on now to our next speaker, who will be Councillor Mattie Heaven. So Mattie is also a Director of IOPHR and Conservative Deputy Chairman for the West Midlands region. Mattie's been a councillor since September 2019 in Coventry South Waynebody Ward. She has a BA in Crime, Deviance and Society, and alongside her work as a councillor, she also has an interest in entrepreneurship and creating opportunities promoting women in technology, having co-founded a female-led social group website in 2022. Mattie's passionate about human rights and human dignity. After her role as a policy and advocacy advisor at IOPHR, she's now a director where her work focuses on women's rights, freedom of religion and belief, and countering extremism and radicalisation. She has successfully collaborated with organisations such as the United Nations and Human Rights Without Frontiers, and has worked closely with policymakers on local and international issues such as defending the rights of religious minorities, women's rights, and prisoners of conscience. I hand the floor over to Ms. Heaven.
Thank you, Beverley. Thank you. Good evening, everybody, and thank you so much for being here today. I really appreciate it. I want to give you a brief update from the last time we were here on the 30th of November. A summary of what's been happening inside of Iran and where we are now and what actions should we be taking moving forward. So from the last time we were actually here on the 30th of November, 4 executions took place by the Iranian regime. Mohsen Shekari was executed on 8th of December. Majid Reza Rahnavard was executed on 12th of December. Mohammad Mehdi Karimi was executed on 7th of January. Just before he was executed, when he found out, he had one call with his father and said, please don't tell mom they're going to execute me because she's going to get upset. He was a champion in karate and he had his future ahead of him. Sayyid Mohammad Hosseini was executed on the 7th of January. Sayyid Mohammad Hosseini lost his parents when he was really young and had no family, and the regime knew that. So when they executed him, there was nobody there to actually take his body. All these 4 people were in protest, and they had one thing in common, and that was they wanted to live in a free Iran. And we know there was an execution of the Iranian British dual national, which I felt it was really much a slap in the face because they knew we couldn't or wouldn't be able to do anything about it. Rape, torture, and forced confession is being systematic with the way the regime is being treating their protesters. We have over 19,000 protesters prosecuted, and if any of them been released, they have been brutally damaged mentally and physically. We have reports that children aged between 10 to 16 have been raped They use severe objects so that when they are released, they actually are internally damaged. And we know the regime has totally ignored all the warnings and been sending Russia drones so that they can kill innocent Ukrainians. Since the uprising, there has been some positive change. I witnessed it. For the first time, we saw a glimpse of hope where a powerful conversation started here in UK, in Parliament, and in Europe. And that conversation was putting IRGC in the list of terrorist organizations. A good start, but this process has slowed down. Another positive aspect has been that the voices of Iranians for first time in 43 years has been amplified in the world, and there's a clear distinction between the people of Iran and the regime. And so we now can say this regime does not represent the people of Iran. And we saw there was few sanctions that took place, not made huge difference at all, and the regime has continued to brutally crack down on innocent protesters and has continued to follow their global terror agenda. Iranian regime poses a global threat. This is not a title of this event today that you're here. This is a reality. This is a warning. A warning that they do pose a threat to the globe and us living in the UK. And I'm going to explain this in three ways that I believe, three parts. The first part is about IRGC. Why we must prescribe IRGC before it is too late. Why we must pull out of JCPOA before it is too late. And my third point that I'm going to explain today is about the diplomats. Why we need to recall our diplomats and why we need to expel Iranian diplomats here before it is too late. The first point about IRGC. The head of IRGC, Hossein Salami, has stated that they are in World War III. He has constantly been threatening the West. I am just going to give you some of the examples of IRGC's activities in the last 43 years. Let us not forget the bombing of the Jewish Community Center in Argentina in 1994, where 85 people were killed and 300 people were injured. The kidnapping, assassination, execution of journalists, activists such as Ruhollah Zam, Abdulrahman Qasemlu, Abdulrahman Brumand, Shahpur Bakhtiyar, Kazem Rajavi, Feridun Farukhzad, Sadegh Sharafkandi are just a tip of iceberg of the names I've mentioned. There are hundreds of more that IRGC has killed, assassinated outside of Iran. So IRGC is continuing to threat journalists such as Iran International, where they're here today, and intentionally shooting down Ukrainian flight PS752, which killed 176 people. They're funding terrorist organizations like Hezbollah and Hamas. They're recruiting gangs to assassinate journalists such as Masih Alinejad, supplying drones to Russian to kill Ukrainian citizens, kidnapping dual nationals and taking them hostage. The list goes on, but this is just scratching the surface of IRGC's activities. And I don't even want to talk about the drug trafficking, human trafficking, money laundering, and how they fund Islamic centers and mosques to radicalize people and allow a breathing ground for Islamist extremism and terror. My question today is, what are we waiting for? Are we waiting for more terror attacks? Are we waiting for IRGC to shut down more passenger airlines? Are we waiting for IRGC to kidnap or assassinate journalists from London? Because that day is too late. It is too late to prescribe IRGC. Some may say that this is not an easy process. You may have heard. They say it's not easy to put IRGC into a prescribe. However, with the list of their activities and their track record, I believe if there is a will, there is a way. My second point about JCPOA. In August 2002, Iran's nuclear program was leaked and revealed to the world. In 2015, JCPOA was signed between Iran and Western governments so that Iran does not gain access to nuclear powers. Between these two dates, 13 years, four agreements were signed. And the reason the 4 agreements were signed, because Iran had violated the previous agreement. So what does that tell us? Can we trust this regime when they violate the agreement each time? Do they at all respect any of these agreements? Even with the current agreement, Iran has 18 times more enriched uranium than it was agreed with JCPOA. For a country that claims that they have no ambitions to make nuclear weapons, this is very alarming. Currently, they have enough enriched uranium to make 4 atomic bombs. So why, my question is why the regime, and especially the regime lobbyists, are pushing us to remain in JCPOA? I tell you why. Because they are buying more time and they are taking us for fools. But one day we will wake up and read in the papers that Iran will be testing its first nuclear bomb, and welcome to the second North Korea. That day will be too late to pull out from JCPOA. My third point about the diplomats. Historically, Iran has used diplomatic channels and diplomats to undertake terrorism, spying, and assassination. For example, the case of Assadi, who used his diplomatic immunity to smuggle explosives from Iran, which he could have and planned to kill senior Western politicians, including UK members of parliament and members of the Iranian opposition group in France. I ask of you, if you just do a quick research on the background of these diplomats, which are sent from Iran to here, you will find out they either have worked as part of IRGC or have trained in IRGC camps. Is this any different to having representatives of ISIS roaming around the streets of London? So I ask again, are we waiting for another catastrophe planned by the regime's diplomats in our country? because that day will be too late to expel these diplomats. From one side, we know that the regime has a history of attacking embassies in Iran and holding diplomats for hostage. Why do we have our diplomats in Iran? We need to recall them. Especially, we know currently the regime is weak, frustrated, and very aggressive. We need to recall our diplomats and expel the Iranian diplomats before it is too late. So finally, I just want to say we are in this part of the time that there's a golden opportunity at this time. But the regime is at weakest point ever in the last 43 years. Together, with the help of the people of Iran, we can eliminate the threat that the regime poses. For a country that their first priority is the safety and security of their own citizens. So going back to the question, how do we stop the global threats by the Iranian regime? Prescribe IRGC as soon as possible before it is too late. Pull out from JCPOA before it is too late. And recall our diplomats and expel Iranian diplomats before it is too late. Thank you for your time, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you very much, Mattie. Our next speaker, we have Mr. Afshin Sajedi. Are you set up with the laptop? It's all good to go?
I think yes.
Okay, whilst you get set up, I'll make a brief introduction. So Mr. Sajedi is a senior policy advisor for IOPHR. Mr. Sajedi was born in Tehran and received his diploma in mathematics and physics in 1981. The closure of universities in Iran after the 1979 revolution delayed his entry to university. However, in 1993, Mr. Sajedi graduated in the field of diplomatic and political relations from the University of International Relations in Tehran. A few years later, in 2001, he enrolled in the University of Leuven, Belgium, and received his master's in European politics and policies. Since then, he's worked with IOPHR as a political and international legal advisor, in addition to being the Director of Research and Analysis on the Middle East. Whenever you're ready, Mr. Sajedi.
Okay, thank you very much. First of all, I would like to offer my apologies because of delaying, and it was on our turn because of delay of the British Airways, 3 hours delay from Brussels to London. And then I would like to thank you everybody for your presence here and giving me the chance to share, I think, very important points and information concerning with the security of all of us. And also thank you, appreciate your attention we paid, constructive and kind attention we paid patiently. Today I'm going to present some information by audiovisual possibilities. So I am Sajedi Afshin from the International Organization to Preserve Human Rights. I live in Belgium, but I come sometimes to England. But we work as one team around the world. Okay. I would like to begin my presentation today by borrowing most famous question ever from the opening phrase of the great writer of language of English language, William Shakespeare. He says that he said given in the speech of the Prince Hamlet, he says that to be or not to be, and that is the question. Later, at the end of this presentation, I will come back to this question, but now I will go further with my own version of this question. and that is why and how the ruling regime of Iran should be kicked out from the international community. The reasons can be categorized in two different groups: functional reasons and structural reasons. The functional reasons are the reasons which are related to the behavior of the Iranian regime. So the functional behavior. And the functional reasons are the ruling regimes of Iran, behavior-related reasons, such as, for example, Iran ruling regime's rejection of all its international commitments and responsibilities, or more than 40 years violation in more than 40 fields of human rights. It's the rule of 40-40. We can remember so. Or approaching the point of no return, by crossing the 60% uranium enrichment limit. Or the Iranian regime's widespread support for terrorism at international level. Or being involved always in at least 10 terror attacks in the United Kingdom. Or systemic rape of children. Or organizing the largest international drug traffic ever. Or so on, so on. But today I'm not going to discuss about these functional reasons, because if even all of these reasons were not true and present, and the regime of Iran was very, very clean regime, still the ruling regime of Iran would lack the qualification to be, to be or not to be a member state of international community, especially the United Nations as a symbol of international community or international family. Due to structural reasons. So the structure of regime of Iran is also damaged and defect and not compatible. The ruling regime of Iran is not an international community compatible political unit, because the ruling regime of Iran is not a nation state. We know that each country that will be in the United Nations should be a real nation state. Otherwise, you have to give permission to ISIS, Al-Qaeda, to other organizations to be a member state, to be a member of the United Nations. But I will explain more. Nation state is the only political form of power distribution which is accepted by the international community. Nation state is also the outcome of Westphalia Peace Treaty, as everybody knows, as the final and permanent solution to the 30-year religious war, one of the longest and most destructive conflicts in human history with about 8 million killed. Nation state is based on interaction and relation between government and the nation. So the nation is the main, exclusive, and only source of legitimacy. The other concepts, like ideology, religion, belief, even God, cannot be a source of legitimacy. It's obvious, I think. But why is the ruling regime of Iran not a nation state? I will explain. The ruling regime of Iran consists of two levels of power. The upper level is leadership and its affiliated bodies. They make together the religious core of the Iranian regime. They are religious. And they have full option, they own full option of decision and policy making. The lower level is the government, the usual government, the ministries, together with the parliament. They make the external face. But They have nothing to do with policy or decision making. These two parts together are under control of super leader, religious super leader. All of them are involved with cross-border destructive activities. Are they going to make another religious empire? Maybe. The supreme leader is the most powerful religious and political authority, the head of a state, the commander-in-chief of armed forces. He should decrease and make the final decisions on all policies, exercise direct and indirect control over the executive, legislative, and judicial bodies, exercise direct control over the media. The super leader also controls the religious core, and religious core on its own term controls the external phase. External phase manages the external relations, but without any power of decision making or policy making. Just to obtain the international facilities, like international tribunes and diplomatic immunities. And then religious core, the controls 35 bodies, all of them involved with the cross-border activities. No information, no control, no clarity, no transparency. And all of them are protected against any control of any control of the external phase. That's why Iran is not joined to the Financial Action Task Force, FATF. External phase, as I said, manages the external relations, and then without any decision-making ability. They try to obtain the international facilities, international tribunes, and diplomatic immunities. And then all of them will hand over to bodies of religious core, like IRGC, Quds Force, Fatimiyun Army. Fatimiyun Army is composed of the Pakistani refugees in Iran, Zainabiyun Army from Afghanistan, and Husseinian Army. This army is new, is made from the Shiiten from Azerbaijan. Based on these facts, we can say that the ruling regime of Iran is not a nation state, but a very dangerous militant organization. Like Al-Qaeda, ISIS, Hezbollah, and Mafia. But the regime of Iran is the biggest and most dangerous one. International facilities, like international banking, and international tribunes, and international and diplomatic facilities, they are originated for promoting the peace and security. Fortunately, international banking their hand is cut off already from the international banking because they didn't sign the FATF. But still, the international tribunes, I think that on the 27th of February, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Iran will have a speech in Geneva. The international, and he will continue to spread hatred and hate. International tribunes and diplomatic facilities still it is under their control. These facilities, as I said, was made for promoting the international peace and friendship and security. But they use it for the spread of hatred and promotion of violence. This should be stopped. This This vicious cycle must be stopped by taking back the international recognition of them. The level of recognition should be decreased from de jure to de facto. Later, I will explain the details, but now just this is the proposition of the International Organization to Preserve Human Rights. By this, now I will come back to another question, to the first question, that my answer to the question of Shakespeare is not to be, and that is the correct answer concerning the presence of the Iranian regime in the international community. For the sake of security, for the sake of safety of citizens, for the sake of human and democratic values, for the sake of innocent Iranian hostage by the regime, please cut the hands of illegal regime off from the facilities which initiated originally for promotion, peace and friendship. Diplomatic relations and international tribunes, these are means just for peace and friendship and not for the hatred. Please do not recognize a religious and dangerous militant group as usual state. Protect peace and security before it's too late. Thank you for your kind concern.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sajedi. I believe we are also very lucky to have Anna Firth here today, the MP for Southend West. Anna, I believe you're going to say a few words. Anna, I know, is very passionate about the situation in Iran, very well versed, spoke at our last event. We'd be delighted to hear from you.
Well, thank you very much indeed. And it's an enormous honour and a privilege to be here. And I really do commend the work that the International Organisation to Preserve Human Rights is doing. It's always a pleasure to be at these events. They are supremely well organised with speakers who are incredibly learned and really know their subject. And tonight has been no exception. And we've heard again from Mattie Heaven, who spoke tremendously well at the last one of these events and has been following the events in Iran closely and is herself now a great expert in this area. Since we were last here, I have spoken in Parliament on numerous occasions now, both questioning the Foreign Secretary, inviting him to make public statements, and speaking in a pretty well-attended cross-party debate that we had, at which time MPs from across the House were all united in our call upon our government to prescribe the IRGC. And this was raised again only yesterday in Foreign Office questions, and Minister Tugendhat was answering those questions. And he is clearly, anyone who was watching that and listening to his remarks will be in no doubt that his sympathies are with all of you and with everyone who is standing up for human rights, standing up for women, and standing against this murderous regime. And I'm in no doubt that if it were purely down to him, the process would already have concluded and the regime would already be prescribed. But obviously this is a government approach. But I am confident that the message has been heard and well understood. I can't go any further than that, but I invite you to read the exchange that took place in the House of Commons yesterday, and I think you will take comfort from the words of Minister Tugendhat there and then. When I spoke last time, I went sort of through my own small story, and I'd like to repeat a lot of what I said, simply because I think it's important. I think these messages do actually merit repetition. And what I said then and what I said in the House of Commons is all that it takes for evil to prevail is for good men and women to stay silent. And I am pleased to say that good men and women on both sides of the House of Commons in our UK Parliament are not staying silent. And they are joining the calls that you have heard tonight. I also explained about my own personal small interest in Iran because my aunt is in her 80s now, but travelled in her 20s from Essex, where I am a Member of Parliament, got as far as Iran, fell in love with a beautiful, free country, and of course with a lovely Iranian man, and then stayed out living in Iran for 2 decades, had 2 lovely boys who are my cousins, and of course had to flee the country with her Iranian husband in 1979 and make their home over here. And I was struck when I was last spoke to you, just as I am again tonight, by the photographs of the ladies in the 60s and 70s in Iran, looking just like my aunt and all of her friends, wearing Western dress, being encouraged to study, encouraged to work. Rights which we women here take completely for granted. And quite right too, because these are basic human rights, and rights which have been completely extinguished for women in Iran. And the pain and misery that's been inflicted on the people of Iran over the last 40 years is horrific. This, what was a thriving economy and a relatively free country, a beacon in the regime, has been taken back to medieval times. In 40 years, it's gone back 400 years. But I am optimistic that we could be on the brink here of a turning point, that these brave young women, could be about to make a breakthrough, and we could now begin to see a brighter future in Iran. But obviously, this has been at an incredible price, and they absolutely deserve, all of our admiration. What these young women have done over the last 6 months, and young men, is mind-blowing, absolutely mind-blowing. And I think that the efforts that they've made are very aptly summed up in the slogan of the protesters, women, life, freedom. Because that is what they are actually standing up for women to have a full life and to be free. Women have been treated as second-class citizens in Iran and excluded from public life since the revolution in 1979. We've all heard that this revolution has started with the very brave actions of Mahsa Amini, and we've heard, obviously, what happened to her, and it's absolutely abhorrent. And quite rightly stood as a lightning flash across the entire world. Only this week, we've heard reports of more horrific treatment of protesters in Iran. And I find these figures absolutely horrendous. According to the latest report by the human rights activists in Iran, we now have nearly 20,000 people who have been arrested in connection with these protests. This is the size of a small town in our country. A whole town has been imprisoned with no human rights, no trials, just a totalitarian regime. 500 people, as we've heard tonight, killed by security forces, including 71 children. I mean, this just cannot continue. And I do believe the international community must stand up to the regime. I do believe that political statements, although they might seem like empty words, they are sending messages, and they are giving confidence to the brave people in Iran that their sacrifices are not in vain, and that we recognise what they're doing and we stand with them. And so I do believe they're important. And in that vein, in October last year, I called here in Parliament for the UN to remove Iran from the Commission on the Status of Women. because it seemed to me so completely outrageous that Iran should have any standing whatsoever on an international committee whose whole role is to look after, to protect and consider the rights of women. And so I'm actually very pleased that the UN did vote to remove Iran from that commission in December. I agree entirely with what's been said tonight, that we need to prescribe the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps and add them to the list of terrorist groups, because that is what they are. We are doing no more than declaring what is actually true and what we all know to be true. And this is something which all sides, which representatives, MPs from all sides of the House are now agreed on. I'm pleased that the USA and Canada have prescribed the IRGC, and I do hope that we are going to see in the next few weeks or months the UK following suit. I can't say any more about all the other points which have been made, although I've certainly heard them, and I will certainly be taking those away and raising those as well with the Foreign Secretary as soon as I can. Yet most of all, I think it's so important that we send a signal to the Iranian regime that their time is up. Young women won't put up with this anymore, and nor will women and men in the free world. We stand with them. This murderous regime has got to go. Thank you.
Thank you very much to Anna Firth there. We'd now like to open the floor to any questions, any comments, anybody that would like to add to the discussion. Please take a moment to reflect and do share your thoughts. Adam.
It's a question to Anna and all of you. What is holding up the UK prescription? Why, in your opinion, has Mr. Cleverly paused?
I'll be totally honest with you. I don't know. I don't know the answer to that question. As I say, it was clear from the exchange in the Commons yesterday that there is now a lot of common ground, and it could be that there are technical reasons, that there are processes that have to be followed. It could be that there are political reasons which I'm not privy to. But as I've said, MPs from all parties are calling for this. MPs from all parties are not seeing that there is a huge problem with this. And if we don't prescribe the organisation now, then when? Really?
I mean, there were reports, weren't there, that it was held up in the Foreign Office by the civil servants in the Foreign Office who want to keep what they call the channels open. But of course nothing official has been said about that. But is there credibility to that?
I honestly don't know. It's not that I'm trying to be tricky about it and not tell you information. If I had information that I was allowed to disclose, and it's not that I know other things that I'm not allowed to disclose, I just genuinely don't know.
So lastly then, but the pressure on the Foreign Secretary and the government is you're maintaining it?
Absolutely, absolutely. And it will only grow. And I hope very much that by the time we meet again, because this is 2 months from when we last met, and we have made a lot of progress in that time. When we last met, this was an issue which I had raised with the Foreign Secretary during one of his regular walk-ins for MPs to meet him, but hadn't gone any further than that. And since then we've had urgent questions, we've had a debate, and we've had the issue now being raised regularly during Foreign Office questions. So the pressure has grown and this organisation is part of that. Having meetings like this makes a difference. Bringing experts from the UN to our Parliament and explaining the legalities
and giving credibility to the things that we are saying helps. So all I can say is more power to your elbow.
Thank you.
Can I just comment on that? Thank you very much for asking that question. I just want to give my take from why the process is being slowed down, or we actually seen in the last 43 years, this is the first time ever since this 5 months of uprising that the world have seen the distinguish between the Iranians and the Iranian regime. But for 43 years, the regime has had their lobbyists around the world very active, because don't forget, this is one of the 5th richest country in the world in terms of oil, second in terms of gas. Although people in Iran are starving, but they're definitely not short of the government money when they bring their lobbyists in, especially UK, with their £2 million golden visas. So what the issue has been, and I think this has become more of a highlight than ever before, because in the past the Iranian dissent voices were not being heard because of the lobbyists. What they would do is tell and advise governments in reference to that, yes, we appreciate the regime is brutal, but we need to keep the door open. There will always a but. And now they come back again, the same lobbyists, by saying, oh no, the regime is so fearful that we cannot close all the doors. We always have to keep that door open. And that suits the regime. And this is what's been happening for 43 years. They invested on these lobbyists, and some of them have been exposed. Organizations have been exposed in the US, and they're coming in different names and different colors. But Iranian dissents have spotted this and saying, these people, these lobbyists on behalf of the regime are not representing the Iranians on a whole, and they're speaking out against it and saying that actually we are happy to put the regime into a terrorist list, the IRGC into a terrorist list. And actually when in European Parliament the majority of MEPs voted for it, we witnessed there was a huge celebration inside of Iran by people of Iran celebrating that the West have heard us. And I think that has been a big issue, and we need to spot that. That is a very good question you asked, and that needs to be highlighted even more. Distinguish between the lobbyists and the actual fact that what we need to prescribe IRGC.
Thank you. If I may just add to that, I think in addition to prescription and criminalization of IRGC, for me the big issue is accountability for all the crimes that individuals within IRGC or as an organization that has been committed. Now, one example is the shooting down of the Ukrainian airliner. And one way families of the ones who lost their loved ones have tried to sort accountability is going and reaching out to the International Criminal Court, because Ukraine is a party to the ICC, and because it was a Ukrainian airliner, there is a possibility of accountability. And I believe that there are so many avenues. It may not be obvious to us, but we have to find ways to hold individuals accountable, including people right at the top. And this must be done to ensure justice, you see. While I appreciate all the efforts that are being done, including sanctioning, I think ultimately accountability would mean a lot more to the people of Iran.
How would you hold them accountable?
Well, yeah, I've just given you an example of universal jurisdiction. Another example is last year in Sweden. Some of you may know about the Nouri conviction. So Mr. Nouri was a person who was a part of the mass killing in the 1980s. He happened to be traveling to Sweden, and he did not have any idea that this would happen to him. But there was information, and Sweden has laws which would allow universal jurisdiction. And I also believe that the United Kingdom also has laws whereby gross human rights violations or gross human rights violators must be and ought to be held accountable. But what we see is that there are many human rights violators roaming around London without accountability. They have assets which they use, they have families which they enjoy those benefits, and yet they cherish and see and enjoy targeting and victimizing people back home, which should not happen. These people should be held accountable for the gross human rights violations and the brutality that they are reflecting. And I would say it not just for Iran, but there are many other violators of human rights who must also be held accountable, because justice has to be done equally to everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And there's a gentleman here.
I would like to thank the organizer for this beautiful event, and thank you for allowing me to be here. Just have a comment. My name is Kawal Masi. I'm Kurdish from Iran, and I'm actually from Cyprus, where Gina was born and grown, and I have first-hand information about what's happening there. Basically, for Iranian, there is no way back. They have to succeed, and some people think that everything is calmed down there, but it's not. It's boiling under the skin of the cities. And we have a group here. There are lots of Iranian group here that get together, and we go to the street every Saturday to be the voice of Iranian people. Everybody pushes for to close down the Islamic Center here, which basically belongs to the Supreme Leader. Those are basic things that people, every single Iranian people in London, they basically campaign for the IRGC to be recognized as a terrorist group. There's lawyers, there's a group of 100 lawyers, they get together, they write letters, they do everything they can that to be done. I mean, I don't know why they would do it, because are they scared that maybe this government won't fall, or they're waiting to deal again with them regarding the JCPOA? We don't know. Basically, people on the street and they are not. How can I put it? They are really pulling their hair out. Why they don't do this? Putting the RGC under them into the terrorist organization, basically, they will bring them down, because the organization, they control the economy, they control everything in Iran. It's not like it is the powerful government inside the government. So this is what happened in Iran. It is a women's revolution, and it will shoot the world again. Basically, if they go, the world will change. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your contribution. Would anybody on the panel like to add anything or respond to that? Or any further questions from the floor? Yes.
Obviously, it's pretty obvious that all of us in this room are in agreement. But the truth of the matter is, since the execution started, most of the protests have just fizzled out. Without those protests, it's no longer on the news. So how do we combat that? How do we bring it back into the domain? Because without it being in the world news, people just lose interest.
Very important question. Anybody on the panel would like to speak to this? Or?
I think that this is where your members of parliament come in and can be powerful, because if everybody here writes to their member of parliament and asks them to ask questions in the House of Commons, then that does get noticed, and that can then be clipped, and that can then be released on social media. And we know that that does get through, and that raises the profile of what's going on. We have to make as much noise as we can. We have to keep shining a light on what is going on over there. And everyone's got a part to play in that. But do keep lobbying your members of parliament. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. Yes.
Hi, Natasha Phillips. It's really hard to envisage a world where the Iranian regime relinquishes its power or changes the way it behaves, because its modus operandi is very much what we're seeing, we have seen for the last 40 years. In the meantime, we also have a country which is unable to raise any kind of opposition in government because it's been structured that way internally. Do we have any precedent which shows us countries who've had a similar infrastructure or situation in which they've managed to actually bring about change governmentally and regime-wise?
Anybody? What I'll say is that from the perspective of my mandate, we have always wanted reform, democratic reform, and we seek democratic reform. So, for example, in 2021, when we had Mr. Raisi come into power, I was very critical the way elections were conducted. I have been very critical the way the National Assembly the elections are conducted. The democratic framework is not quite there. So it is difficult, and you're right, to envisage a system where reform would be inbuilt into the system. And for a very long time, I have considered that there are possibilities, but I have come to the conclusion that because this is a systemic impunity and absence of accountability, there would have to be radical changes, you see. Now, the big question is how the international community, with the limitations that it has to work under, how can we bring about that democratic change? I mean, the democratic reforms must come from within. But what I would say is that internationally, the people of the United Kingdom, the government of the United Kingdom, can support that. And there are many ways to do that. One, I have just said, that we speak to all of our partners, all of our allies. And I'll give you one example of my own country. You see, I come from Pakistan. We have Balochis, and Balochis are victimized in Pakistan. It is very unfortunate. It is an unfortunate fact. And Balochis are also being victimized in Iran, and we've seen horrific news coming from there. But we have to engage Pakistan as well into the situation of the Balochis, to encourage this right to self-determination. Because ultimately, if Balochis are empowered, then they can stand up for their rights. The same situation with Kurds. And I note the point made earlier, because these ethnic provinces have been the hotspots. They are the hotbeds of reform. They want change. They have been repressed for so long. And we have to encourage democratic presence. I mean, we have to speak to Turkey, we have to speak to Iraq, all of the partners that we believe are working alongside us. And sometimes I'm just shocked when we are talking to, let's say, Pakistan, we don't discuss the situation of Balochis, because sometimes we think it's uncomfortable. But uncomfortable discussions have to be had if we want democratic reform and if we want change, because ultimately that would be the only way that the country would change its course. Thank you.
Yeah, well, I mean, I agree with that this has got to come from within, because what one could say is there was a revolution in 1979, and the Shah's regime was overthrown and replaced with this regime, which is horrendous. And of course, there's a lot been written about why and how that revolution came about. And obviously, my links to Iran, I've heard a story as a child of the West being instrumental in that revolution, and it wasn't for the best. And I think the history of the West pursuing a regime change policy isn't good, and so therefore, I agree. This has got to come from within. That's the way for it to be a lasting peace after the revolution. What we've got to replace, I believe, is this tyrannical regime with something which is truly democratic. What I think would be not desirable would be to replace one theocracy with another. I think it must be the choice of the Iranian people who governs Iran next.
Thank you. We have time for one final question, if there's anybody still hoping to. No?
Can I say something about that from within Iran. Over 19,000 people are in prison. Most of those are the leaders of the demonstration. They have been recognized, they found them there in prison. Basically, we see people on the street and in Iran, usually they say, we don't ask for help, don't help them. Don't help the government, don't deal with them. That's what people ask. Basically, it is within, and the people, Iran had never ever, the Iranian people have never been so united as they are now. I'm a Kurd region, but I have been involved in politics since I was 14 years old. I have never seen a unity like now. People in the street here, when they see me, when they found out I'm Kurd, they say I'm from Tehran. I have people who have a lorry packed with medicine. We want to send it to Kurdistan. Give us contacts. It's a huge change. It's a huge unity in Iran. And, that's what people say. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing. Okay, I think due to time we will have to wrap up now. A few closing thoughts from my side. I was thinking it's fitting that this event took place today. It's now a historic day, obviously, with the words of President Zelensky still echoing from the Great Hall. Back in November, in his annual threat update, the Director General of MI5, Ken McCallum, he went into detail about the threats posed by the UK, posed to the UK by Russia and Iran. And he openly described Iran as the state actor which most frequently crosses into terrorism. And Iran, that with its proxies remains a profoundly destabilising actor in its region and beyond. I think President Zelensky's speech today brought words of thanks, but also, most importantly, brought words of urgency. And I've heard that, I think, across the board today. There is a sense of urgency. I think Mattie said there's a golden opportunity, whilst the regime right now is at its weakest, whilst people around the world know and pay attention, and it's our responsibility, as you said, the people to not stay silent, to keep making the noise and to keep bringing it into the news. And when we consider that, as Mattie said, the head of the IRGC talks about World War III, whilst at the same time working to further the efforts of Russia in Ukraine, it's very clear how important and urgent it is for the West to act now. So thank you all for joining us today and for keeping the conversation alive, for listening and contributing. And we look forward to hearing more good news, hopefully.
Thank you.